already I think the TAs have created a Google group for this course, and the message has been sent to all the students. You are asked to join that group, right? So please do that if you are not already joined. Okay. So I'll actually switch off my video because I'll be using a notepad to write a few things. Okay. Also, that will save the kind of bandwidth. Okay. I also suggest that all of you please switch off your videos. Okay. And also keep your mics off, muted. And whenever you have a question to ask, please unmute your mic and ask the question. Okay. Yeah. Started. Oh, what happened this? Okay. I hope all of you are able to see this notes where I'll be writing. Okay. Coming?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, good. Yeah. Again, if there is any problem, send us a message to chat. Okay, good. So let's get started. As all of you know, right, this course is the first level hardware course. And in the new curriculum, which started in 2015, there are only 2 hardware level courses. One is this Foundations of Computer System Design this semester, and then we have the Computer Organization and Architecture course that will be taught in the next semester. Okay, so by the end of these 2 courses, the students are expected to pick up the relevant background on the design of computer systems in general and the main concepts and principles related to computer organization and architecture. So basically, at the end of these 2 courses, one should be kind of in a position to design a computer system and also understand how a computer system that's available nowadays will be functioning, and the many issues related to the design of the current day computer systems. We'll slowly introduce many of the terminology that we'll be using in this course as well as in the next course. Okay, so both these courses also have a laboratory course associated with that. I'll be giving some details of the exercise to be done in the laboratory course and what kind of tools to be used and so on a little later, right? And the computer organization architecture course will also have a lab course called the assembly language programming lab, right? Where some of the topics that are covered in the computer organization architecture course will be dealt with in the exercises that are given in that course. Okay, so what we are going to do in this first lecture and maybe if required in second lecture is get an idea of overview of the contents of this course and also some idea about what you are going to study in the computer organization and the architecture course. Of course, I will not go into too much of detail on the second level course. Okay. Again, as I suggested, if you have any questions, please unmute your mic and ask me. Right, I'll try to answer the questions. Okay. So let's get started. So in order to understand how to design a computer system, or also in order to understand how a nowadays computer system or how the current day computer system functions, right? Let us try to first of all understand what is the basic function of a computer system. Then we'll try to get some idea about the different functional components in the computer system. Then we'll go into the details of each of these functional components in this course as well as in the next course. Okay. As I mean, I'm sure all of you have used a computer system by now, and many of you understand the main purpose of a computer system. Of course, one can use a computer system for many purposes, right? starting from running some serious applications to games and many other utility applications, right? But from a computer science engineering point of view, right, we try to look at a computer system as you can by now understand or know is where we give some data to the computer system, and along with that we specify what kind of processing that needs to be done on this input data. So typically that will be in the form of a program, and after this program is executed on the data, we will get the output also in the form of the data, right, which is typically what is called the processed data. Depending on the application, what we mean by this processed data will be different. Okay, this is a very generic picture of the functionality of a computer system, right? And we need to understand each and every element in this. That is, what do you mean by input data, how the data gets represented, then what is the output data that we are getting, in what form this output data is represented, right? And what does a program contain, right? And how does this program get represented is one more aspect that will be interested in understanding. Then what is there in this, what I call it as a black box called the computer system, right? And at the end of these two courses, you'll have a very good idea about what will be present in this computer system, and more importantly, how to design this computer system. That is, basically we'll try to understand and learn, right, how to design the different functional components of a computer system. And as we can clearly see, the main purpose of this computer system is to process the data as specified by a program and then get the results in the form of the output data, right? So we need the required components in this computer system to do the processing and to take the input data and also to output the processed data, right? As you might have studied in some of the previous courses, maybe in the CS 1100, right? The main components of a computer system, the hardware components, right, as you might have studied a little bit, right, are what are called the central processing unit, shortly called as the CPU, and we also interchangeably use the term called the microprocessor to refer to this central processing unit, but a more appropriate term is the central processing unit. As the name itself indicates, this is the most important component of the computer system, which does all the processing, and also it does what is called the controlling the operations within the computer system. So as we'll be seeing later, right, the central processing unit itself consists of mainly two parts. One is what is called the arithmetic and logic unit, then another unit called the control unit, right? Yeah. So the arithmetic and logic unit, as the name itself implies, is designed to carry out all the arithmetic operations and also the logical operations. As you already know, right, because you already done a lot of programming exercises, right, in both CS 1100 and the or CS 1111 course that you have done, right, and maybe in CS 1200 also, right. You know what does it involve in writing a program, a high level language program for some problem, for solving some problem, right? So typically it will involve the numeric data, right? The numeric data can be represented in the form of what are called the whole numbers like integers, or it may be represented as the real numbers, right? Which are also called as the floating point representation of the data, right? So the arithmetic and logic unit will have the necessary circuits to perform the basic arithmetic operations on the integer type data and the floating point data. So typically, as you'll be seeing later in the course, right, this ALU itself will be split into two parts. One is what is called the integer unit. The other one is what is called the floating point unit. So the integer unit will perform all the necessary operations, arithmetic operations on the integer type data. Like in the C program, you will have the variables of type byte, int, short int, long int, and so on, right? So all these variables which are of integer type, which are the whole numbers, which can be positive numbers or the negative numbers, right? All these integer type data variables, the operations will be carried out by the integer unit. And as all of you know, the basic arithmetic operations we are talking about are the operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And logical operations are on the binary variable data, which are typically the logical operations like the AND operation, OR operation, and so on. We'll come back to the details later. And the second part of this ALU, which is called the floating point unit, is going to perform all the necessary processing on the real value data. Again, you are familiar with the data types like float and double in the C language. Both of them are for representing the real numbers. So the circuitry required to perform the arithmetic operations on this real value data like float or double type will be present in this floating point unit. At a later point, we'll try to understand why this is called the floating point unit, right? And how the circuitry required for performing these operations on the real values are going to be different from the circuitry in the integer unit. And that in turn is actually dependent on how the processing itself is done on the integer type data and how the processing is done on the floating point type data. You need to perform the same kind of operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Okay. And typically, when you write a program in the high-level language, as all of you know, the high-level language program gets processed by a tool which we call normally as a compiler. There are other forms of these tools which can take a high-level language program and then get as an output as what is called the machine code. All right. So the compiler takes a high-level language program like in a programming language like C, right, and then converts it into what is called a sequence of machine instructions. This sequence of machine instructions is put together what is called as the machine code. Okay. So typically this machine instructions are going to be different for the different types of processors. Okay. And the compiler has to be accordingly designed to convert any given high-level language program, let's say a program in C, to the sequence of machine instructions of the particular processor. Okay. And of course, you'll be studying in more detail about the design of the compilers in a separate course in your fifth semester. But the compiler design also requires a good understanding of how the program gets represented into this sequence of machine instructions. That is, what are all the different types of machine instructions that are available, what is the format of those machine instructions, how these machine instructions themselves get represented in the system, right, is what we need to understand in order to understand the machine code generation process by the compiler, right? Again, we'll be touching upon this topic of the mission instructions, their formats, and their representations briefly in this course, but in more detail in the computer organization and architecture course, right? And it's very easy to note that all the mission instructions of a processor should be uh, good enough, or the size of this the set of mission instructions should be adequate to translate any high-level language program into a sequence of operations that can be executed by the processor, so that the program can be executed by the processor to process the input data and then generate the processed data, right? As you can quickly see, this mission instruction should minimally include all the arithmetic operations on the integer type data, the arithmetic operations on the floating point data, then the logical operations. Then there are many other types of instructions other than this arithmetic and logical processing instructions, right? And as we'll be seeing later, right, we may want to jump from one point of the program to another point of the program, or we may want to call the functions or the procedures, and we may want to pass on the arguments, and we may want to support both the iterative programs, where the programs will have these loop structures, or you may want to support the recursive programs or the recursive functions, right? So all the these operations should be supported by the set of mission instructions of a particular processor, right? So that's where the designing the set of mission instructions of a processor is going to be very, very important. Again, we'll be briefly touching upon that in this course, and we'll be studying more about that in the next course, okay? But what we'll be studying in this course is how to design each of these units, like the arithmetic and logic unit, which in turn will be having two components, like integer unit and the floating point unit. And we'll briefly also touch upon the design of the control unit for a simple processor, but for a more complex processor, we'll be studying it in the next level course. And it is not just processing the data, we also need to look into how do we store the data, where do we store the data, and then where do we access this data, and also the program, right? And so the second part of this course is going to be on understanding the issues involved in the design of the memory component, okay? And typically the memory component is the memory unit is the one where both the data and the program are stored, and they'll be accessed from the memory and then brought into the CPU, where the processing will be done, and the processed results will also be stored in the memory unit before they are sent to the output devices, like a hard disk or to a display or any other input-output device, right? And we'll be looking briefly into the details of the basic components of this memory unit, or the basic circuit elements of this memory unit, right? And how to design simple memory structures in this course. But the more detailed discussion is going to be there, right, in the next course. But if you really look at the typical computer system nowadays, right, it'll be interesting to know what are the specifications of a current day computer system, okay? And it'll also be interesting to know where it all got started, maybe about 40 to 50 years ago, right? And where do we stand currently, right? And interestingly, the main underlying principles of the computer system and its design have not changed significantly, right? But the way these components are designed and implemented have changed significantly over the past 50 years. And also the capability of the computers have changed significantly over the past 50 years. And one way of looking at the complexity of these systems is looking at the main component, that is the central processing unit, right? And then look at how complex this is, this CPU. And one way of looking at the complexity of this CPU is of what is called the transistor count in the CPU. I think you might have come across this term called the transistor in your school, or maybe if you have done a course on the basic electronics, you would have come across this circuit called the transistor circuit, which forms the basic circuit element in the design of the different parts of the CPU. Okay, as we're seeing quickly, the two basic elements in the design of the components of the CPU and the memory unit are going to be what are called the logic gates, and this will be used for designing many of the circuits in the arithmetic and logic unit, right? Whereas the control unit and the memory unit will be typically using a different type of circuit element, right, called the flip-flop, which is actually the basic circuit element that has memory. Memory basically it remembers about the past and uses that history in generating the next output. Okay, again, we'll be going into the details at a later point in the course, right? But flip-flop is the basic element in the memory unit. And interestingly, these flip-flops are also built using the logic gates. And each of these logic gates is also built using the transistors, right? So typically, any part in the CPU we'll be looking at will be finally be built using the circuit element called the transistors, right? And there are a variety of transistors that are available, right? But typically, the kind of transistor that's used in most of the systems nowadays are what are called the metal oxide semiconductor transistor, and it's also specifically what is called the complementary metal oxide semiconductor transistor. And we'll not go into details of this CMOS transistor in this course, right? Those who are interested can look into some books on the electronic circuits, right? And what we are going to look at now is how this transistor count on the CPU has changed over the past 50 years. If you look at the first microprocessor that was available in 1970s, specifically 1971, which is called the Intel 4004, which is actually only a 4-bit microprocessor. As the name itself indicates, the type of data that can be processed by this microprocessor is limited to only 4-bit data, right? But I think those who have written the programs in C language, they know that we don't have a way of representing the 4-bit data, right? The minimum size we can represent in the C language is actually the 8-bit data, which is like a byte type data, right? Or a character type data. And the larger sizes like 16 bits, right, which is the short integer, or 32 bits, which is the long integer, or a float type data, which is also a 32-bit representation, or even 64-bit, which is corresponding to maybe double long in the integer type data, or the double type of the real value data, right? And from the 4-bit microprocessor in the 1970s, we have come to the 64-bit processors nowadays, right? I think many of you are familiar with many of the current day processors because you would have been looking at the specifications for many of the current day processors. So some of the 64-bit processors, which I think you'll be kind of familiar with, are the Intel i7 processor, which was introduced sometime in early 2000, right? And it started with the first version in 2012, right? And then there are much more complex versions of this i7 processor, right? We'll be quickly looking at introducing one more term called the core of a CPU, right? And depending on the number of cores that are there in the processor, right, they'll be called as the dual core process or the quad core process, right? 8-core process and so on, right? The latest i7 processor that's available has got 12 cores, right? Which means that the i7 processor with 12 cores, right, is much more complex in terms of the circuit complexity, that is in terms of the number of transistors that are present. But more importantly, the kind of computational power it has got is an order of magnitude more than the first i7 processor that was introduced. Okay, and just to get an idea about the number of transistors that are present in the processor chip, was only around a few thousands. Like this Intel 4004 processor has got only 2,300 transistors. Coincidentally, this is the course number of our course, right? But it's only a coincidence, okay? But it's easy to remember, right? If somebody asks you what is the number of transistors in the Intel 4004, you have to just remember the course number, that is 2300, okay? Yeah. And I'm not sure how many of you can guess what is the number of processors or number of transistors that are there in the typical i7 processor. If I'm looking at a 10 core, I'll briefly tell you about what do you mean by this core. If you look at this 10 core i7 processor, which was introduced in 2012, whereas this 4004 processor was introduced in 1971, right? This i7 processor with 10 cores was introduced in 2012, right? This has got about 3 billion transistors, right? So we can see now we have moved from a CPU with the 2,300 transistors to 3 billion transistors. Just to give you an idea, each of the logic gates that you'll be using in the design of the various circuit elements typically uses 6 transistors. All right. So what does that mean? The number of logic gates that will be there in the Intel 4004 processor will be only about 400 logic gates, whereas the 10 core i7 processor, which has got 3 billion transistors, will be having 3 billion divided by 6, right? You can calculate that. That turns out to be around 500 million transistors. 500 million gates. Okay. So then one keeps wondering, what are these 500 million gates used for, right? And as we'll be seeing later in this course, every component that we'll be designing in this course will be finally realized using these logic gates. So the number of logic gates required for a particular component design depends on the kind of processing that's done, right? And that will decide the circuit complexity. Okay. And just to give you an idea, bulk of this 500 million gates that we are talking about go into the design of the processor chip, right? That is, we are talking about these 10 cores. Typically, each core is going to have its own ALU and control unit. I'm again putting it very simply, right? The current day core actually is what is referred to as a multi-threaded core, which means that the core will have multiple ALUs and maybe only one control unit, which means that, as you can kind of see, right, the core will be capable of executing several instructions simultaneously, and execution of the several instructions involve executing several or performing several arithmetic operations in parallel, right? So we may be performing the 4 different arithmetic operations on 4 different types of operands, or we may be performing 4 floating point operations on 4 different pairs of operands and so on, right? And that's what the typical core is capable of in the current day scenario. And now we are talking about several such cores being present in the processor chip. Okay, so when you say dual core processor, we are talking about 2 cores being present, which means that each of the cores can execute 2 different applications, right? And the later point will be introducing a term called the process, right? So each core can handle one process, but again, you might be familiar with the term called the thread, which are a thread is a part of a process, and in a multi-threaded core, it's possible to execute multiple threads of the same process on the same core in a simultaneous manner, right? And each of the cores supports the execution of multiple threads. Typically, it will be 2-thread processor or a 4-thread core, right? Which means that if I have 10 cores, if each of the cores can handle 4 threads, I can execute 40 different threads on the same processor simultaneously, right? So that's the capability that we are talking about. And when we say process, typically we refer to an application. It's very common that, I mean, all of you know, right? On a particular system, we'll be running not just one application, right? We'll be running several applications simultaneously. Each of these applications will be a process, and each of these processes will be typically run on a different core if there are multiple cores in the CPU. Okay, so what you're talking about is the circuit that's required to perform the multiple arithmetic operations for the different threads of a process. And when you have this multi-core processor, right, supporting the execution of multiple processes simultaneously, right? So that's where the bulk of the circuitry will be taking away the large part of this 500 million transistors that we're talking about. And another component in the cores that consume or that make use of this millions of transistors is a particular type of memory that's present on the processor chip. As you'll be seeing in the second course, this memory unit typically consists of 2 types of memory units, right? Which is going to be the cache memory unit, and the second one is what is referred to as the main memory unit. So the cache memory unit is faster than the main memory unit, but it requires more number of transistors to build one cell in the cache memory unit compared to the size of the cell in the main memory unit. Typically, the main memory unit cell will require the 2 transistors, whereas the cache memory unit cell requires 6 transistors. And also the time taken to access these memory units is going to be much less for the cache memory unit compared to the main memory unit. Okay, and typically this cache memory unit will consist of a hierarchy which means that there are different levels of cache memory unit. And in the current day process, it's common to see that there are what are called the level 1 cache, level 2 cache, and in many of the current day processors, even the next level cache, that's the level 3 cache, is also on the processor chip. Okay, or at least the L1 cache and L2 cache is on the processor chip, right? So in order to support this L1 cache and L2 cache on the processor chip, where each memory cell will take 6 transistors, right? The typical cache memory unit sizes we are talking about will be maybe a few kilobytes for the L1 cache to a few megabytes in the L2 cache, right? Now you can see each core having its own L1 cache and L2 cache, right? And the multiple cores having each of these L1 caches and L2 caches involve having so much of memory in the processor chip itself, right? So the second part of the CPU nowadays, which takes away bulk of this transistors, is this cache memory units. Okay, and main memory unit will be typically outside the processor chip. That's why actually the access in the main memory is going to be slower than access in the cache memory. All right. Again, we'll be seeing many details of this. And what I refer to here is a 10-core i7 processor, but there are the later processors which are available nowadays, right? And just to give you an idea about the current day processor, right, which is coming from actually Amazon, which was introduced in 2019. I'll just give the name. You can look for the details. AWS Graviton processor, which is a 64-core CPU, right? So earlier we talked about a 10-core i7 processor, where each core will consist of multiple ALUs and a control unit. Now we have to think of a processor with 64 cores, which means that this CPU can support the execution of 64 different applications or 64 different processes, and each of these cores can support multiple threads of the same process by using the multiple ALUs that are present within the core, right? And just to give you an idea, the number of transistors that are available or that are used in building this 64-core CPU is 30 billion transistors. Again, divide that by 6, assuming that each gate will take 6 transistors. So we're talking about CPU with 5 billion logic gates, right? Again, as you can quickly see, right, bulk of these gates go into the design of these cores, right? And of course, to support the presence of the cache memory units in each of these cores, okay? So what is to be understood is, what is this going to be used for? What is this kind of a processor going to be used for, right? Actually, many of these 64 core CPU that I'm talking about is used in huge computational servers, right? Which can handle several applications being executed simultaneously, right? So what we will be interested in is, in this course, right, to understand how we design the basic components within the CPU, right? That is, how to design this arithmetic and logic unit, which in turn consists of the integer unit and the floating point unit. And then we'll try to understand how the basic memory unit is built, right? And then we'll also try to understand the design of what is called this control unit, which controls all the operations that are carried out by the CPU, right? So when you have a sequence of instructions to be executed by the processor, right, some unit in the processor has to take the responsibility of getting the instructions one after another from the memory. Then after the current instruction is performed, right, then we have to move on to the second instruction and so on, all right? So all these operations are controlled by this unit called the control unit, which is typically a hardware circuit which is present in the processor chip, right? So we'll try to get some idea about these control unit operations. Again, the more details will be discussed in the next course, okay? So what we'll be studying in this course will be the design of basic circuits using logic gates, and then go on to build the useful circuits like the arithmetic and logic units, right? Both for the integer operations and the floating point operations, right? Then we'll go into the details of the memory unit, basically to see what is the basic memory element like the flip-flop, and how one can use several flip-flops to design the basic memory unit. Then we'll try to understand the interactions between the ALU and the memory unit and the control unit, and to perform the necessary operations like the execution of program, right? And it's not just the hardware that's present in the system that we are interested in. We're also interested in trying to understand the several pieces of software. It's not just the user software or the user applications, right? There are also many other programs which are required to operate a computer system, right? And these are normally put together called as the system software. Two major components of system software, as you might be already knowing, are the operating system itself, right, and the compilers, okay? So we'll try to get some idea about what is it involved in designing an operating system, and what is it involved in designing a compiler, just to get a complete idea about the design of the computer system. So what will I do now is I'll just open the document where we have this syllabus for the course, quickly go through the contents of this syllabus. Just to give you an idea, we'll post it also on the Moodle. Okay. So what is being proposed for this semester's course is as follows. We already started with the introduction. We got some idea about the functional components of a computer system. We'll be touching upon the interaction among the functional components like ALU, control unit, memory unit, and so on later, maybe in the next class. Then we'll go on to the design of what are known as the combinational logic circuits. These are the digital circuits which are built using only the logic gates. Okay, and the reason why it's called as the combination logic circuits we'll try to understand later. And the design of this combination logic circuits is actually derived from, or basically dependent on the what is known as the Boolean algebra, which deals with the laws and theorems of operations that are carried out on the Boolean variables or the binary variables, right? As all of you know, the data as well as the code or the instructions are represented in the form of the bits, right? So we are dealing with the binary variables, that's the variables which can take only two values, either 0 or 1. Then we'll briefly look at the Boolean expressions and then how to simplify the Boolean expressions. The simplification of the Boolean expressions will actually help us to realize simpler circuits without changing the functionality of the circuit. Then we'll look at some of the building blocks in the combination logic circuits called the encoder, decoder, multiplexer, and the demultiplexer. We'll come back to them later. But the focus of the course is going to be on the design of this arithmetic and logic unit. In order to understand how the circuits can be designed to perform the arithmetic operations, we need to first understand how the integer data gets represented. Then we'll discuss design these circuits for addition. They are called integer adders and also integer subtractors. Then we'll look at the circuits for the integer multiplication. We will not spend too much time on the integer division. Okay, we'll be seeing the reasons for that later. Then when we put all these adder circuit, subtract circuit, and the multiply circuit together, we get what is called the integer unit, which can perform all the arithmetic operations on the integer type data. After that, we'll go into the details of the floating point representation of the real values, and then the design of the adder subtract circuit for the real value data and multiply circuit for the real value data, and then how to put them together in the form of a unit called the floating point unit. And it's not only the numeric data that we'll be dealing with, we'll also be dealing with the character data, that's the text data, and we'll also be dealing with the processing of the signals like the audio signals, video signals, and so on, right? We'll very briefly look at how these signals get represented within the computer system. Then after we finish the discussion on this arithmetic and logic unit, we'll go into the details of the design of the register file or the registers and the memory unit. As I said, the basic elements are the flip-flop elements, and the circuits that are designed using these flip-flops are what are called the sequential circuits. And we're also going to focus only on the synchronous sequential circuits, where all the flip-flops will be controlled by a common signal called the clock signal or the control signal. And some of the building blocks that we'll be making use of are the registers and the counters. And of course, the main unit that we are interested in using a sequential circuit elements are the memory unit. So that's what we'll be focusing on in the design of the sequential circuits. At the end of the course, we'll try to understand how do we generate the machine code from a higher level language code, and then how do we execute this machine code. For that, we'll understand the basic structure of a simple CPU, then how to generate the machine code binary representation from the machine instructions, then how do we generate the machine code itself from the higher level language code, then what is known as the application binary interface. We'll come back to that later. All of this will be resulting in what is known as the microarchitecture of the CPU, and that will help us to understand how the machine code gets executed in the CPU. And towards the end of the course, we'll try to understand what we call as the virtual machine in the current day systems, a simple compiler being designed, a simple operating system that supports what is known as the virtual memory and the paging to support the execution of multiple processes simultaneously in the computer system. So this is basically the coverage of this course, and the textbooks are given here. Many of these textbooks are available in soft copies, so please try to get hold of them. And we'll be making use of this first book for the basic combination logic circuit design and the sequence circuit design. All the arithmetic circuit design will be covered in this book by the Hemashare, and some parts in the last two modules, that's the 5 and 6 modules, will be taken from this book 3, that is the elements of the computer systems. And this third book will also be used for the laboratory part. We'll discuss the laboratory exercises in the next Monday's class. But this document has the list of lab exercises that we planned for this laboratory course. Okay. Maybe I think I'll stop at this point just to see if you have any questions quickly, then we'll close. Yeah. If you have any quick questions, we can have. Those who have questions can unmute and ask. Okay, so the evaluation method for this course, it's not yet decided. There is a discussion going on at the institute level. Okay, very likely is that there may be 20% evaluation weightage for the tutorials. Again, we are looking into what kind of tutorials can be given, and 80% maybe only for the NSEM exam. This is what is being discussed, but we'll confirm it later. And the NSEM will be conducted whenever you people come back to the campus, and we are not sure at this point of time when you will be able to come back, or we may conduct the exam at TCS ION centers where typically these JEE exams are conducted. Okay, but we'll come back to that later, right? So you may have to be prepared for doing only the tutorials during the semester and taking the end semester examination at the end of the semester. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, we'll be sharing the document on the Moodle, right? Good. Any other questions? I know it's not like a regular physical class, right? There it would have been possible for me to see the response on your faces, right? Okay, so the next question is about attendance criteria. This is also being discussed at the institute level. The DN academic courses will be announcing the attendance criteria for all the courses soon. Okay, and we'll follow the same. Yeah, actually, there is already a WhatsApp group for the CS19 batch. Okay, maybe you people can be. I think this is Utkar from Mechanical. I think we can add your names to that CS19 WhatsApp group. I request that administrator of the CS19 group to add the students from the other departments who are doing this course. I can share the details of these students. I think there are about 7 or 8 students from the other departments. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So all these notes that I will be writing will be also be loaded and uploaded on Moodle, but I will do it normally after one topic is covered. Okay. Yeah. Good. All these mechanical engineering students are giving their details. So I request the administrator of this WhatsApp group to add their names to the WhatsApp group. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Otherwise, I think we'll close this and we'll meet at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Again, please use your SMail IDs. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm adding the invite link on the.
Sorry. Okay.
Added the group invitation on the.
Sure. So I think, oh, this is a new group. Is it the same as the CS19 group? Vineet?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Because I'm already there, group. So others can join this group, the other branch students. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay, there are no other questions. I think we'll close this meeting. Is that fine? Because you may have class at 10 o'clock or sorry, at 11. Okay, see you then tomorrow at 9 o'clock.